Hello and welcome to Off My Shelves, and in this episode we're going to be delving deep into Jeph, Loeb and Tim Sale's absolute Batman collection containing Long Halloween, Dark Victory and Haunted Night, so let's get underway. This was bound to happen with rewatching Batman. To be fair, The Long Halloween was such a gigantic influence on this movie, as well as the other really big notable movie, Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan and Christian Bale and all that. Long Halloween must be one of the most taken from and adapted Batman story in film history. I think it must be. There's a lot of elements of this story taken and dispersed and disseminated across all of the Batman film world, really. But certainly when I got to the end of Batman, I wanted to reread a lot of my favourite Batman stories, and Long Halloween was at the top of the list, really, because this was, I think, the second Batman story that I probably went through in full after Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, and it was certainly the second Batman book that was given to me or that I bought after that, and so it's got a lot of fond memories and a lot of nostalgia for me, so I'm probably gonna just be waxing lyrical about how much I love these rather than being really ridiculously critical. But anyway, before I get too far, the build of these absolute editions. So the absolute editions, obviously, as you know, and if you don't, then I've got a video in the description below. It'll tell you about the sizes and how much I love absolute editions. So they all come in a slipcase. Each of the books are hardback bound. These don't come with any dust jackets at all. Some absolutes do, these don't, however, but they do come with I forget what the terminology is now, whether it's half bound or quarter bound, or I totally gone out of my head, but either way, the front cover is kind of got this matte paper finish, but then once you get to the end of the spine there, this faux leather finish takes you round to the back, and that's the same for each book. The only major difference, apart from the artwork and the name obviously in the bills, is really with Long Halloween, because in Long Halloween on the back they did this extra little detail of having Batman standing there in this white kind of silhouetted form on the back, which I really liked. But that doesn't happen across any of the others at all the rest of them are plain backed. Each of them come with matte finished paper on the inside, and again, some people will like matte finished paper, some people won't. For me, I've only ever read Long Halloween in matte finish paper, so the difference in colour with the high gloss paper and things like that has never really stood out to me because I've never experienced it. So the stories. The story of Long Halloween is probably well known to most people watching this channel, but just in case you haven't yet experienced the glory of Long Halloween, it all revolves around Batman's second year, more or less. Is kind of certainly heavily influenced by Batman Year One from Frank Miller, and essentially they wanted to see the development of that story, what happened after Jim Gordon and Batman started taking a real deep dig at the mob. And so this is very much the middle ground between super criminals coming into being and the mob going away. It's that awkward in-between period, really. But it starts off in Carmine Falcone's wedding, starts off very Godfather-like, very intentionally as well, really setting the scene of this gangster mobster wedding and setting up the characters and all the different dynamics between the different families and factions within the mob. And Bruce Wayne being first and foremost featured because as a philanthropist, as a billionaire, he is very heavily invested in the story right from the get-go, because the Falcone family are trying to launder money through one of his banks. But either way, you get introduction to his sons, you get introduction to all the Carmine Falcone family and the opposite families, as I said, but you also get a Selina Kyle introduction, because Selina Kyle is one of those mysterious characters throughout this, as Catwoman normally is, really. Harvey Dent is shoved out right from the get-go, and if anything, if I were to explain exactly what this story is, it certainly is the super criminals coming of age and coming into their own being and the mob taking a backseat, but it's also an origin story of Harvey Dent as Two-Face, really. It really is the definitive origin story of Two-Face, I would say. It starts off and the Falcone family are trying to do their best to keep ahead of the game on the crime in Gotham, and Batman and the police force, Jim Gordon, is trying their best to put it to one side. but they're failing. So Batman, Jim Gordon and Harvey Dent decide to get together, and they decide to make each other a promise. And the promise is that they would take down these gangsters, these mobsters, no matter what. And they would all agree on this promise, and they would try their best to work together to those ends. But other people have got other plans, obviously, and quickly a new villain is thrown into the mix. And this is the villain that gets named Holiday. And this is a serial killer that strikes on holidays. So Christmas, St. Patrick's Day, April Fool's Day, all the holidays, they kill a person on holidays. And mainly it starts off with them targeting squarely the Falcone family. Tim Sale's artwork is never going to be to everyone's taste, because he's very much a cartoonist, and he very much has this stylistic view of art, which I love. So the art is really kind of, accentuated and over the top in certain areas when he wants to give that mood or that feel or that impression. But it's very much over the top art, muscles upon muscles. Even Catwoman is like the butcher's Catwoman you'll ever see, but it still retains such beauty, I think. I love Tim Sale's art in this story, and all of the stories, to be fair. The art is the main reason why I wanted them in absolute format, because Tim Sale's art, when it's blown up to this size, is just glorious. It really is. But either way, Holiday begins to kill people, and each chapter of the book, there's 13 chapters in total, take you through the year that's to come. So starting in that October, starting when that first killing happens, and then it catches up with our crew, our cast of characters, every holiday that a holiday killing happens. And obviously it goes without saying that as you progress, other criminals come in, like the Joker, like Mad Hatter, Scarecrow, all these characters. But one thing that you have to keep in mind in this book is one thing that I think a lot of people overlook in the storytelling of this and the follow-up Dark Victory, is that this is supposed to be a young and new Batman. He's a year or two into his criminal career, and so he's still learning as he goes. So he does make mistakes and does make errors. He's not the kind of Grant Morrison Batman that has a plan on top of a plan on top of a plan. He's not that Batman. He's still learning. But the criminals are as well. That's why the mobsters in this story are far more level-headed and far more dangerous to a certain degree than criminals like Joker, because the Joker has really only just started. Because if you remember, whether it's canonical or not now, I can't remember at all, but he started after Batman started, so technically he's younger in his career. He's still developing. He hasn't become this insanely kind of driven serial killer that he will become later on. And same as all the other characters, they have not yet achieved what they will become later. So certainly don't go into it expecting a totally, refined Joker who's a maniacal serial killer who's killing everything that moves. Don't go into it expecting, even a Scarecrow that's so level-headed and so devious, because again, he's starting out and fresh and new. I think one of the problems with that is Tim Sale's Batman and Bruce Wayne look so old and dominant. You don't think of him as a young man, really. But either way, he certainly is. And I think the story does a great job not pushing forward the super criminal's age and Batman's mentality. They keep it quite well grounded, and everyone is making mistakes and everyone's trying to form their characters and their MOs and all that type of thing. So when the killings happen, the book goes monochrome and black and white with a bit of splash of colour, of red or of some other significant object. But they are certainly events in the book. When that monochrome colour happens, you're attentive, you're looking at the panels, trying to figure out who the killer is and things like that. And they throw so many red herrings at you in this book that you constantly are thinking it's this person or that person or this person or that person. And it's phenomenal for that, I think. It's also phenomenal for the character development, which is why the story is so interesting over 13 or so issues, I think, because obviously if a killer is coming and no one's getting any closer to figuring out who the killer is or anything like that, then the mystery can become annoying over this amount of issues. But it doesn't here, because you're having some nice development of Gotham, you're having some nice development of the characters, Harvey Dent obviously being one of the main focal points here, and certainly looking at Harvey Dent's character's progression in here, how he's constantly trying to bring down the mob, making mistakes, getting made a fool of, and essentially being pushed and pushed and pushed, and then an event happens which I won't spoil, which I'm sure many of you know already, but I won't spoil, and it just turns Harvey Dent from being this passionate district attorney that's bringing down the mob into a super criminal. It just destroys him, and that has a big impact and pulls a big toll on Batman and Jim Gordon. And so the events of Harvey Dent and the impact of that very much carry on through Dark Victory. But by the end of Long Halloween, you do get that culmination, you do get that reveal as to who the killer is. And again, if you're anything like me, when you get to the end, you want to reread it because you're like, well, I can't believe that, I can't believe I didn't see that, or how exactly does that work, and you kind of restart it. So even the ending brings up questions, which is what any good detective crime thriller story should do, really. It shouldn't just end cleanly and wrap everything up nicely in a bow. It should be confusing, because it was confusing for the world's greatest criminal going through it. So when we get the ending, obviously it's going to be confusing to us. The storytelling by Jeph Loeb and the artwork by Tim Sale throughout all of these is just phenomenal, I think, really strong. But Dark Victory is a direct follow-up to Long Halloween. It really does start where that ends. It starts off looking at the captured Holiday, how that person got killed and got arrested, and how Batman acted in that moment, and his act of over-the-top violence towards the Holiday killer has sort of scuppered his longevity in prison. So the Holiday killer is back out on the street, but that is not all of the problems that are presenting themselves in Dark Victory. One of the main problems is that there's a new killer on the scene that is nicknamed the Hangman, and they quite purposefully strike on holidays like the Holiday killer in Long Halloween, but instead of shooting them, they quite brutally hang them and then leave a hangman puzzle on their chest, part finished. And they are targeting specifically police, and they targeting police that are heavily involved in Batman Year One. So I would say that you don't have to read Batman Year One, I should say, by the way, but if you do, you'll get a lot of extra character development. So the police that are sort of left behind in Frank Miller's Batman Year One are developed more. They're not all killed, but they are certainly, their story is taken to another level, and you get a closure on a lot of those characters. So the reason why the police are being targeted and the reason it's happening on holidays does get explained and has got a deep meaning to the Hangman killer when they are revealed. But you start off this story with Batman in a very dark place, because he sees what he did in Batman Long Halloween as a bit of a failure. He failed to find the killer quick. He failed to help Harvey Dent and stop him being turned into, you know, this maniacal super criminal. And so he's gone very much inward. He's distanced himself from the police force. He's very much on his own. He's pushing away people like Selina Kyle and Alfred and all these characters and being very inward. And that's why the addition of Robin is a great addition to this book, because what happens to Robin in his origin stories and Dick Grayson give Batman someone to empathise and to connect with. And so in that connection, Batman finds someone that he can be honest and truthful with and bring into his life, really. And so Batman and Dick Grayson's inclusion in this story is really important. Even though it doesn't happen till quite late on, it is quite important, because it shows that Batman needs someone to kind of bring him back into the real world and to give him some connectivity to the real world. Otherwise he just disappears in this spiral of crime fighting, hate and guilt and all this type of thing. Miss Porter is the new DA, Janice Porter. She's the new DA on the scene. Very different from Harvey Dent in every way, shape and form, but a really good character and a really good addition. The crime families are still all here and the super criminals are all here. And this is very much the point where you get a battle between super criminality and the gangsters in Long Halloween, but this is very much the fight where the freaks, as the gangsters call them, try to suppress the gangsters and try to take over crime in Gotham City wholesale. And Harvey Dent is very much the centre and the focus of that push. It really is the three main characters of Batman, Jim Gordon and Harvey Dent. They really are the three main characters and main focus in both of these books. You also get a lot of Catwoman story development, but I would say that a lot of the development of Catwoman and her character comes in the final volume, weirdly enough. But either way, I'll get to that when I get there. This story certainly is always vying for my favourite of the trilogy, because it just feels like it's a step up. It feels like the stakes are a bit higher. I suppose the way the cops are killed and everything just seems like it's a bit more serious. It's still got all those same red herrings and interesting points and fantastic artwork and story development as Long Halloween, but it has got that extra element where the criminals, particularly the Joker and people like that, feel a bit more like the characters they will become. Everyone pushes forward a bit more. But then the third in the series of Absolutes decides to do something completely different. So this collects 3 stories that they did before Batman Long Halloween. So it's almost their introductory stories as a partnership doing Batman. So it collects Fears, Madness and Ghosts. So the first 2 revolve around pretty straightforward stories. The first being around the criminal Scarecrow, the second around Mad Hatter, and the third, Ghosts, is almost a retelling of A Christmas Carol, really, in Bruce Wayne Batman style. So a lot of criminals come into it and a lot of different things happen. But just me saying it's a retelling or a story inspired by Christmas Carol pretty much gives you the gist of that story, I think. But the first one, Fears, is a fantastic Scarecrow story. And yeah, obviously you can imagine what defines a Scarecrow story is pretty much going to appear here. But I think it's done so well. It's one of my favourite Scarecrow stories. The artwork is great, but you can certainly see the refining of his artwork and his ideas of Batman and Gotham come into fruition in the other 2 books rather than here. The second story, Madness, is all about, obviously, Alice in Wonderland's favourite export, the Mad Hatter, doing his thing, really. And it is a good story. They don't overdo the Mad Hatter, they just play him about right, but it's certainly bringing Barbara Gordon into the Mad Hatter's world, and that's an interesting addition. But again, the art is just glorious. And the third one, A Christmas Carol inspired Ghosts, is exactly as you would think. Certainly for me it's not as interesting because it is kind of one of those, it almost feels like an Elseworld story, A Christmas Carol, Batman Elseworld story. But it is worth a read, certainly. But it is the weaker of those 3 story arcs, I think, to start off this Absolute. I will say about Ghosts, though, it has some amazingly good art in it. It really has some strong artistry. Then you get Catwoman, When in Rome. Now this is a story that's following Catwoman as she disappears temporarily from this story arc, Batman Long Halloween, and she goes to Rome. Now the reasoning behind all of that and the details do come up and you do go through it, and it very much is a standalone Catwoman story and bringing in some interesting characters like the Riddler and things like that, and doing a lot of the things that Catwoman stories do best, you know, cat burglary and lots of glamorous scenes and things like that. But it's certainly Selina Kyle escaping the madness of Gotham and trying to earn a living and trying to find some answers to certain things. I can't say too much about it because then it spoils her storyline overall in there and the mysteries there. But certainly it is well worth read, but I would definitely say that it is the weakest storytelling of the whole thing. Art-wise, it's really good. Some of the best drawing and some of the best artwork Tim Sale does appears in here, and the colorist is a bit different. I think there's a different colour going on and a different colour palette, and it really adds to the story. But the artwork is phenomenal, I think, in this storyline. But the story itself is a bit weak. It's a bit unenjoyable for me anyway. I'm sure some people enjoyed it, but for me it was just a bit middle of the road. It was okay, but it certainly fills in a lot of the gaps of Catwoman's story that you don't get in these 2 storylines. Either way, I have talked way too much about these books. Absolute, Batman Long Halloween, Dark Victory and The Haunted Night. But I hope you've enjoyed having a look at these 3 books with me, and I will catch you on the next one.